Hello and welcome everybody to today's ROIC webinar, where we've got a great agenda lined up for you today, where we're going to be talking about some of the big themes of 2021 and tips on how to embrace them. So this webinar is brought about off the back of some of the employee experience opportunity, which we launched alongside Brand Experiences back in November 2019. And today we're going to hear about some of the results that's come out of our recent survey, really understanding the employee's perspective on employee experience and the opportunities and areas for improvement that we need to work on. And therefore as well, internal communicators, what are the opportunities that we have? So I'll jump on and talk about that as well. And we're also going to spend some time at the end of it with our final speaker, who's going to share some of their experiences and tips on how they're tackling the area of well-being. So for the agenda today, I'm going to pass over shortly to Mike Sharples, who is CEO of Brand Experiences and who we've been working with for over almost a year and 3 months now, I would say, on the employee experience opportunity, who's going to share those results. I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about the big trends in internal comms. And then I'm delighted we're going to be joined by Sarah Voigt, who is Deputy Director for Corporate Communications at the Ministry of Justice and also a recent award winner for Best In-House Team at the ROIC Awards last year. So as always, please do, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comment box, and at the end we'll come back for some time for Q&A. We are also recording the webinar, so don't worry too much about frantically making notes off the stats, because we're also going to share the report with everybody that's here today. So don't worry too much about having to scribble something down. So you hope you can have the time to really listen and tune in and pose some questions to the panel. So on that note, I shall now pass over to Mike, who has been leading us on this piece of research, who is going to talk us through some of the results that have come out that can hopefully really inform how internal communicators can take hold of the employee experience opportunity and some of the things that we can perhaps focus in on in our strategies in 2021. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Jen. I was a bit slow on the unmute there, so I'll try and be a bit quicker next time. I wanted to start, first of all, just with a few thank yous, if that's all right. So first of all, thank you to everyone for coming along today. I know we've got a good sized audience. I can still remember the days, this is the last Friday of the month, lunchtime, typically sort of payday for those of us that can remember those days. We'd normally be spending Friday lunchtime down at the pub. So thanks for taking the time to join us today. But I also wanted to thank, who's on the call, my sort of partner in the employee experience opportunity, Nicholas Wardle. And it's really through a conversation that we both had, again, over lunch on a Friday in Camden about 18 months ago, when we were talking about the frustrations we had of not being able to get the right level of senior management buy-in and particularly budget to do what we thought we could do around the employee experience. And after that really came the idea to about what the issues were. And I guess the bottom line we came up with was that the reason that senior leaders are not backing EX as much as maybe they're backing CX, because they weren't so aware of the ROI. So we took it upon ourselves to help move that business. As Jen mentioned, we launched the EXO with the IOIC last November, and like everything else, we had no idea what was coming around the corner. So from our point of view, obviously things have been delayed as well. We're not immune to the effects of COVID. So I just wanted to maybe give you a quick update on where we're at with the roadmap that we set out for the employee experience opportunity. We really saw it as ideally we would have had this all completed by last summer, but obviously we needed to wait and see what was happening with COVID. We actually went back and updated the survey with some COVID specific questions so we can get a better understanding of how that was affecting people. But we carried on anyway. We've got the EXO survey completed now, and today is really the first time that we're going to be publishing any of the results. And everybody on this call will get a full copy of those results. There's over 45 data points in total. So we're not going to go through all of those today. We're just going to give you a snapshot of those results, but you will get the full result. And in there, we also do include some further analysis, some insights, and some actions you can take to mitigate the things that come out in the survey. But essentially, the reason we did the survey, we wanted that analysis, was really to inform the ROI model. So we believe very strongly that the ROI for employee experience is actually much stronger than the ROI for customer experience. And what we need to do is really be able to demonstrate that to our senior leaders. And as part of that, we've got an ROI model that's already available, and we are in the process of making that an online tool, so anybody can go website and do a calculation themselves. We're also in the process of releasing the EXO toolkit. That should be out in March, and at the end of that, we're also releasing a book which is unashamedly called Monetizing the Employee Experience. We really wanted to arm internal comms and employee experience professionals with the right kind of tools and language to go and have the right conversations with senior managers, and ultimately get the investment that's needed to really make a difference in lives at work. I think we all share a common goal. It's really a question of what's the best way of getting there. So in terms of the survey itself, as I said, we're not going to go through all of the details today, but you will all get a copy. Just wanted to share some of the information, particularly around what sort of scope and who responded. In total, we surveyed around 2,000 people, and it was a pretty good mix of people from different around the globe. Obviously, we're a UK-focused organisation ourselves, as is the IOIC. So the majority of the responses, 68%, you can see here, coming from the UK. But we did have a good smattering of respondents from all over the globe. Obviously, this is also the first year that we've run the survey, so we're not really able to show you any sort of trends or differences from last year. But obviously, we do intend to run this on an annual basis. We'll look forward to sharing that information with you as well. In terms of the types of organisation that responded, again, quite a good mix. So 41% less than 1,000 employees, 39% between 1,000 and 10,000, and quite a decent amount of 10,000 plus organisations as well. So I think it gives us a good sort of balanced snapshot of what's actually going on out in the marketplace. Very strong female representation in the numbers, so pleased to see that. And in terms of the types of organisation, again, a good split between private entities, public and not-for-profit sector. So again, I think what we haven't done necessarily in too much detail in the results itself is start breaking the results down by those different elements. We've got the capability to do that, but obviously there's a limit to how much we wanted to put in a single document. I think one of the things that we'll be discussing with the IOIC for future events is maybe, if you wanted to sort of run an event around how does that look in the public sector or not-for-profit or private, we could run some additional webinars and workshops to explore some of those numbers as well. And we've got a good range of industries. Pretty much every industry is represented. So hopefully you can see your particular industry there. So telecoms and technology seem to be the largest contributor, followed by non-profit and government and then education. So again, we've got the ability to be able to break down the results by some of those factors. And if people have an interest in that, then certainly more to do that. Looking at some of the results themselves, as a senior leader, this would worry me quite a lot. This would give me sleepless nights. We asked how long people see themselves staying at the current organisation, And as you can see here, 57% of people expect to leave their employer within the next 3 years, and quite a few of them within the next year. Now, because we spanned the whole sort of COVID, the first lockdown anyway, it may be that lockdown and COVID and some of the implications of that might make people less likely want to leave, but it doesn't change the fact that they were feeling like they would leave. So it's something we not only need to be aware of, but need to make our leaders aware of and have a plan as to how we're going to mitigate that risk. And that's not just a lot of disruption to the organisation, a lot of costs certainly in terms of replacing people, but it's also a lot of knowledge walking out the door, and it's probably more indicative of just a general feeling of employees not feeling as loved as they might like to. So that's definitely one that I was quite surprised the numbers that high, to be honest. In terms of diversity and inclusion, I know that's a big topic area for the IOIC and internal comms and employee experience communities at large. So on the face of it, 72%, 73% looks quite good, but I don't think we should really be resting on our laurels here, and I guess really anything less than 100% improvement on that probably isn't good enough. There's still some more work to do there. In terms of feedback, again, just under 50% believe that their feedback is taken seriously. Again, a low number, I think. And what we want to do is obviously make sure we don't have too much apathy within the organisation, where people feel if people aren't going to listen to feedback, I'm not going to really provide honest feedback. One of the things we're seeing quite a lot now is certainly an understanding or a realisation that the kind of annual survey approach to getting feedback from employees isn't really working, and people are looking for something a bit more regular. And certainly it's very important to close that feedback loop. So we're seeing now smaller sort of pulse surveys where people can act on them more quickly, people can give you a much more immediate response to how they're feeling at the scenario. Because I guess at the end of the day, it's just an annual survey, and there's lots that goes on during the course of the year that people aren't necessarily discussing with you. And certainly I've seen organisations that when it's coming up to the annual employee survey, they start a big PR campaign and really try and sort of manipulate the results that might come back. Which again, employees ultimately do that. Again, another worrying statistic from a leadership perspective, that only 55% had confidence in their leaders. Whether leaders know this or not, I'd be interested to get feedback in terms of whether any of the people on this call have got some numbers relating to their organisation. But I suspect if you asked an employee directly whether they had confidence in the leaders, they're probably less likely to say no than they are in this particular environment. But that's definitely something where we need to work with leaders, make them more visible, make them more human, make them more authentic. And obviously, we talk a lot about being a values-based business, but it still seems like we've got quite a bit of work to do to ensure that leaders are regularly communicating those visions and values and being seen to live by the same vision and values. Again, from this point of view, the commitment to delivering the best possible experience to employees, that really should be a bit of a no-brainer. But as you can see here, there's less than 50% that believe that organisations are committed to providing the best possible experience for employees. Again, it's a fairly sad statistic, but something that we can use to drive our work forward. In terms of, we talk a lot about getting parity. The whole point of the EXO is to get parity between customer experience and employee experience. And I know that a lot of organisations still talk about becoming customer-centric, whereas for us, really, what organisations need to do is become employee-centric. Ultimately, there's no way you're going to be able to service customers well unless you look after your employees. They're the people. Typically, we're working in the sort of, B2B business services space. Certainly, you can't deliver a good customer experience without a good employee experience. But I think there's still a lot of work to do to convince leadership that actually it's the employees that should come first. A little bit like, I guess an analogy I would use, I've got my family and I've got my friends. So my family would be my employees in this case. My friends would be my customers. I spend all my time with my family. I see my friends occasionally. A bit like me putting my friends or my family. That just wouldn't happen. And I don't think it should happen in the business context as well. We've got a few questions in the survey relating to change, which again I know is quite a big topic. We've got a situation where probably we use the term quite often that the only constant is change, and certainly COVID's had a big impact on that. Even before COVID, there were lots of business transformation, digital transformation projects going on with varying degrees of success. And only 28% of employees feel that their organisation manages change well. It gives us some indication of why some of the projects may not be working. Now we've been forced to change at the moment, so people just got on with it. So it shows that the workforce are particularly adaptable, but we need to work harder to involve them in that change. I think that's one of the key issues relating to this. What was interesting is that 28% across the board only believe that they've managed change well, but that dropped quite significantly to just 19% when we looked at organisations with over 10,000 employees. So it seems fairly clear that the bigger the organisation gets, the bigger this challenge becomes. So as well as managing change, we also look at how we communicate change. So slightly better figures here, but still nothing to boast about. And again, we get involved in projects often with clients where we're coming at it late in the day. They've been doing a big change program. They're just about to implement maybe some new technology. And often it's only then they start to think about how they can communicate it, how they can worry about adoption, and whether people are the new technology. So that needs to happen much earlier in the process. And again, the number dropped again quite significantly down to 25% for organisations with over 10,000 employees. In terms of the sort of pandemic and the effect that's had, probably easily predictable in the whole survey. Has the pandemic meant you've changed the way in which you work? Absolutely. I think that everybody said yes to that. We are only looking at the first wave of the pandemic here, so we haven't got information relating to the current wave, or people are still in that situation where they adapt the way they work. We're all doing it today with our Zoom calls as well. And in terms of something that I know is a sort of topic of conversation around many organisations, we ask when offices reopen, do you want to go back to working how you were before the pandemic? And obviously a very large majority of people, I think we would accept that, said no, and a relatively small number would like to go the way they used to work. And when we come on later on to talk about motivation, there are some reasons why those sort of numbers. So we just touched on the pandemic there, which leads us nicely into handing back to Jen to talk about the impact of internal communications.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. There's some so many fascinating statistics, and I think some of them as internal communicators were kind of like, yeah, we would expect that, and some of them were sort of going, oh, okay, there is a mountain to climb and things like that. And what I'm going to quickly share with you now is just that's very much looking at 2,000 employees and their perceptions, taking away that, doing that within the survey of your own organisation. So there's, as Mike said, you might get a slightly different response when you do it in that way. But I wanted to just take you through what actually is then happening in internal communicators' world. Are we seeing what employees want align with what we're planning to work on? And I think actually, refreshingly, we are seeing that. I think we are very tuned in, we're very curious and very aware people. And actually, as Mike said, some of this data can really help us showcase that case for why actually, if you put communication at the heart of employee experience, it will drive all those relative numbers up. We're not saying employee experience is wholly down to communication. There's many things, pay, satisfaction, you know, all those reward, benefit, career progression, but communication is the fundamental thread that sits through that. So we have a real opportunity to drive forward a communication, I guess, hearted employee experience to some degree. So in terms of what's going on in the internal communication profession in itself. Now here, obviously, what we've got here is looking at how we have responded and what we felt about the crisis. And I think as a profession, we have overwhelmed. We did 2 surveys last year. We did one at the beginning of the first wave, and then we did one at the very end of last year. And the number, and that's always a lovely thing, the number stayed exactly the same, particularly on the feeling towards our positivity towards internal communication, with 90% of our members saying that they feel the pandemic has brought a positive future and an increased focus. We're exhausted. Workload capacity is a real challenge for us as internal communicators. And I think I'm very proud of what we've done as a profession, because I feel we've gone above and beyond with so little. But actually now we're at that forefront now where we've got that ears, those hearts, and hopefully with some of this data, the wallets, to actually really expand further on what we're doing. But how has it changed actually the way that we are communicating? And again, I don't think there's any kind of new information in here, but I think, and it's something that we're very aware of. But what does it mean? It's about that important. I'm picking up on, first of all, imperative experience for everyone. I think that's become really important, and that measures itself with the employment experience opportunity. And what do I mean by imperative experience for everyone within an employee context? Well, we talked a lot about offline, remote. They're really hard audiences. We don't perhaps, we'll just use huddles and face-to-faces because, you know, there's too hard or too big an investment to bringing them into that loop. I think what the pandemic has done is meant actually we have to have comparative experience for everyone, irrelevant of their personal circumstances, their role, their geography, their placement. We need to get that comparative experience for every employee because everyone is in value. And I think that through investment, particularly by seeing what technology can do, we've been really working at deriving that comparative experience for every employee. Certainly more digital and virtual. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think it will be interesting picking up on that statistic that Mike just talked about how the majority of people don't want to go back to the way that they were. We'll have a job to work out what that looks like and what that hybrid world looks like. I think choice and trust is going to be really important values for us to do that. We've certainly had more pace, less polish, just because we've had to. But actually, we found that that's okay. Having fewer sign-off processes has been really important. We couldn't have delivered the pace that we have without taking away some of that sort of, dare I say, bureaucracy that's actually hindered some of our abilities. So I think that's been a really good thing for us. There's other things as well around this need to be, we've talked about human-centered communication. We've talked as well this year about the need for the year of empathy. But picking up on Mike's data there, employees want authentic leaders. That makes a difference for how they feel and the experience that they have. And we have had to really see and drive that human authentic nature with our leadership and increase their visibility in that. You know, and obviously with that, there's also the element of line managers that comes into that. I'll just pick up a couple of more things in this area as well. More cross-functional collaboration. And again, employee experience is going to be based upon our ability to work well with our colleagues in HR, marketing, external operations, facilities. So I think that because of that, we've had to actually be, dare I say, we're all in it together. And by enabling that collaboration and being more collaborative with our partners and other functions, we can really drive forward that consistency. And like I say, when we get back to the physical, we're going to have to make that worth the commute. And of community trust, those values that we talk about, again, we talked about it in the data, those values that we say that's really important to us are really, really key themes for us. So what does that look like? How have we evolutionized as a profession? We've evolutionized a lot. And I think sometimes it's really easy to look at what we haven't done rather than what we have done. And I think we need to really applaud ourselves on what we have done and how we really have changed as a profession from that broadcast function of newsletters and event management to then thinking now where we're at about that well-being and that checking in and that need for all of that stuff. But as we look to the future, it is that social CEO, the ability to have emotionally centered communication, the ability to align our organization to our people, align our functions, align our purpose, align our values. Trust is first principle. Omni-channel approach, thinking about how we really drive that integration and that use of our channels in a more tied up kind of way. There's many other things on that, but I'm not going to spend too long on it. But I just want to show that there is a real future that we're driving towards, and there's real opportunity. And with data like that, we can really go forward, I think, with confidence, knowing if we do these things right, we can make a really, really big difference in our organizations. The last one I want to just quickly touch on as well is we did a survey, as I mentioned, at the end of last year to really figure out at the end of the year, what are we prioritizing as a profession in 2021? What are the big things that we're going to work on? And cultural change actually came out as the highest priority for internal communicators in 2021. And I think this comes off the need to be human-centered, that emotionally centered language. There's many organizations that I'm speaking to who have perhaps said we can't go back to corporate, and I think once you make that sense of humanity and that connection, to jar back that language would take us back too far. So we need to really embed that intrinsically through cultural change in not only what we say, how we say it, how we connect. Now, this is going to be a really big priority for internal communicators. And again, linking in, which is nice to see with actually what the data and what employees want, is leadership communication. Again, using their visibility. Health and well-being, absolutely. We've got to look after our people. If we look after them, they look after our customers, they look after our businesses. It's hard, it's challenging. And we've had well-being issues before COVID. Well-being is an issue that we've always lived with. It's exacerbated a lot, and I'm very looking forward to hearing from Sarah, who's going to talk more about the work that they've been doing shortly. And also as well, there's other priorities, developing IC strategies. I realise we're still in a kind of a weird place where we're trying to work out what the future looks like, what's going to stick. But I think we can be really assured with this data what the employees want more from us. So really trying to map that future and be more strategic led to look at those needs as the workplace probably transforms forever. And finally is also inclusion and diversity. We did some amazing work. Yes, tragic circumstances last year with the murder of George Floyd led us to do that, but I think that's been and you can see that shine through as well actually in some of the data we've seen before, whereas actually one of the areas where employees feel that organizations are doing a good job, but it still needs to be, as Mike said, we need to get that to 100%. So we need to keep that still on the agenda. The sixth one that's not on there is line manager comms, and I'm going to come back to that as a really important area. Our line managers have a real responsibility, particularly linking to well-being and that sense of belonging and that sense of value. And that's actually number 6 on the internal communicators list. And I think looking at that data, we can see actually how really vital that is becoming in our mix. So that's what's going on in internal communicators' priorities, and we've heard also what the employees want. So I think that kind of really gives us a nice double perspective. So now I'm delighted now to hand over to Sarah, who is joining us from the Ministry of Justice, as I say, recent award winner. I think you've been over in comms for over 10 years across internal and external, and has been doing some amazing wellbeing work in her organisation. And Sarah's going to come on. Oh no, now I think, is that right, Sarah? Now, yes, yeah. To talk about that sense of what they're doing and share their case. So Sarah, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and hi everyone. And we're sort of picking up on some of the themes Jennifer talked around empathy, humanity, and focusing on kind of well-being work. Before I kind of launch into what we're doing, I just want to sort of take a pause and just say, how everyone is feeling. And obviously on a virtual call, we can't spend the time to go around and put our hands up and talk about how we're feeling, but I just thought it's worth just having a think about that, and probably if we did go around virtual room, you'd have a huge range of different emotions that we're all feeling, and then it might be different if we were talking about that today to even last week. Certainly for myself, I know I've been feeling pretty tired at the moment, lockdown 3, I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I have all the sort of schooling and looking after her, and kind of intense workload, but also feeling really energised by the work I do. And internal comms used to be that kind of quieter sister of external comms, didn't it? But, this past year, I think it's probably shown all of us on this call today that, how much organisations realise the importance of internal comms because of the past year, and how it's never been more important to boost staff engagement. And that certainly gives me a kind of a sense of drive and purpose kind of every morning when I kind of start work. I've been working from home, like many of you, I'm sure, over the past year, and I work at the Ministry of Justice. We're a big government department, and we have 75,000 staff across hundreds of sites across the UK, across 500 courts, 120 prisons, working on the front line right throughout the year of the pandemic. And then we have about 5,000 staff in our HQ, mostly working from home, trying to keep the justice system running. So we've had kind of lots of factors to think about in terms of our employee experience. And I wanted to share with you some of the things that we've been doing at MOJ. Before I kind of dive into that, I suppose I just wanted to mention that I think it's so important that we as individual communicators look after ourselves and our teams first, because we have to be able to do that before we can, think about looking after thousands of people in our organisation. And I know, probably like most of you, all of you, my team have experienced those ups and downs of lockdown, heavy workloads, often having to do 24/7 rotas, working at weekends, and kind of making sure that we're all kind of okay through that. And I think my kind of overriding sense from the last year is the importance of kindness. Jennifer talks about humanity, but that, if we can help our organisations be kinder places to work, I think, that's a really important aspect of what we do. In terms of how we've approached things at the MOJ, at Ministry of Justice, I think there are kind of three areas that I wanted to share with you. One was around our strategy and culture and how we've approached that. One around line managers and relationships and connections. And one around how we've tried to sort of reach people as individuals through our content and the kind of focus on the kind of health side of things. So kind of looking at the strategy and culture side, one of the things that we already had pre-pandemic this time last year, quite fortunately, we launched the organisation's first wellbeing strategy. And for me, that was helpful, timely, because it was a kind of a signal. It's just a document, but it's a signal that this thing matters, and it helped us think as an organisation about what's the policy, the support, where are those places that people could go to. Those things existed before in the organisation, but not in a really strategic way. And I think that really helped. And I suppose many of us will have those strategies in place, but if your organisation doesn't, I think there's a role for us as internal communicators to speak to our CEOs, to speak to the board, to talk to HR about that, and be a kind of active participant in developing their strategies or refreshing them. Because as we know, it's wellbeing is not an optional extra, it's what makes good business sense as well. And then I think there's something that has been really important for us over the past year around culture and tone, about leaders signalling things from the top. It's all very well to say, well, wellbeing matters, but you've got to have your senior leaders really putting that into action. One of the things that has helped us is about 3 years ago, we developed our kind of our values. And so that has really, whether it's through our R&R approach, through kind of our policies, we've tried to sort of look at those through the lens of our values. And in storytelling, we've tried to sort of weave those into what we do. And one of the roles that we've sort of played in internal comms is to sort of be out there in the business trying to get eke those stories out of directors and encouraging them to be more open. And what we found is once you get a few people doing it, snowballs and more people feel they can. So one example, we had a director, a very well-respected director, who talked in a blog about how he gets panic attacks and anxiety and used to find it quite crippling, and how he has managed that. And stories like that, of course, then signal very importantly to other staff that they can do that too, and that's to be welcomed and not something to sort of put under the carpet. So I think there's sort of a number of things around culture and tone that have been really important for us that we've tried to bring out in our role. And then on the line manager side, obviously, as we all know, so important that line managers follow through, but it's the hardest bit, I think, of our job, isn't it? That sort of speak to your line manager, but how does the line manager know what to say, and how do you make sure that's happening? And we've really tried to focus on that, partly through working on HR, through, creating guides to encourage those one-to-ones, working on kind of video tips, on how to have a well-being conversation, but also just trying to facilitate materials that will help line managers with that. As one example of what we've done, so we have a monthly briefing product called Let's Talk About. It's on a different topic every month. And a few months ago, we did one on purpose. And, you might think, well, why wouldn't you do it on well-being? Why do it on purpose? But kind of there are 5 drivers of workplace wellbeing, and purpose is a really important one of those. So we felt it was a good time to encourage senior team leads to sit down with their kind of teams and have that conversation to really remind them, we're tired, people are at their computers often, especially in kind of HQ type roles, but actually to kind of connect to why what we do really matters, which certainly in MOJ and Justice, we have an amazing purpose, but often people can lose sight of it. And I think it's the same probably for a lot of our organisations. So to really try and help line managers have those conversations on that, as well as on, encouraging those one-to-ones on personal topics. And I suppose the other thing I wanted to say on the kind of line manager, we've kind of shifted in MOJ to a sort of what I call a person-centred approach. So rather than just looking at well-being through mental health or physical health or financial health, to sort of, yes, obviously those things are very important, but to try and encourage the manager to see the individual, and to, when they're having that conversation, not just to focus on the task-focused conversation, but to really try and think about individual kind of needs, because some people want to do yoga at 7 o'clock, lots of people won't. So not just assuming, well, that works for me, that'll work for you. So we've tried to sort of encourage kind of openness around those conversations, around thinking about what is it that really matters for that person, what are adjustments that might help someone in their role. And then the third thing, in terms of how we kind of, through our content, we've tried to help people as individuals. We love channels, don't we, in internal comms, as well as doing all the strategic stuff, because that's one of the ways to reach people. And certainly when we sort of tried to promote kind of the health side of things, I think trying to just be creative, tapping into some existing things out there in the external world, like September. We had feedback from some staff saying that was the thing that really helped them. So, not always reinventing the wheel, find something going on externally and tap into that. But then also encourage those staff stories. So getting their stories of, a staff member. We had one staff member with a chronic illness that talked about, for her, weightlifting helped because she had a condition where she was really sort of struggling, and it was kind of very moving. So encouraging those stories that are very personal, but that can just kind of lift other people's spirits, as well as kind of encouraging people to say, well, how are they coping with homeschooling or so forth, so that people, when they're at home on their own, aren't feeling, quite so alone with that. And we've done a lot around gratitude as well. The importance, I think there's a lot of evidence around there, how gratitude, just saying thank you to someone, just can lift your day. And obviously that's great if your direct line manager, your colleagues say thank you, but we've tried to sort of help the culture around that by doing some campaign activity. One example, just before Christmas, as part of the Christmas campaign, we did some Advent stories. So we encouraged staff to nominate people that they thought were being kind of justice heroes just in their everyday work. And then we kind of showcased those on the intranet. Not people doing anything extraordinary. It's just someone being a really good colleague, a really good manager, and helping each other. So trying to, I think, what we try to do is a range of different things to appeal to different aspects of people's lives. And then the final thing, just before I hand back, I suppose it's in terms of how we've applied it in our team. Like I'm sure all of you, our workloads have been very, very intense at the MOJ, and so we've kind of really put in place a lot of things to try and support the team. Things like, we had a rotated wellbeing lead, just so that we had someone who said, I'm feeling really good this week, I'm fine to just check in on everyone, you don't have to have a chat, but if you want to, I'm here. We did kind of things like, for those that wanted to, a 5K relay. So on WhatsApp, we've got a little group, and someone will do a 5K, post a picture, pass it on to the next person. So those things that, even though we're remote, we could sort of try and connect with each other, because, we're not there at the T point, and having things like tea at 3. So, on certain days, 3 o'clock, just knowing there's going to be someone on a Teams call that would be there if someone wanted to drop in. And I think that really important, that role we can have in internal comms, kind of fostering an environment where people's voice is heard, and that you feel that there's someone you can connect into. So kind of as I hand back, I suppose my key reflection is around that thing of just, for all us, being kind to ourselves. Think about what's that thing that makes you feel better. For me, it has been long walks, listening to loads of music. What's that thing that matters to you, and to take that time, because if you're able to find that, and then you'll have more inner reserves to help your organisation.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great, and it's lovely to. We've talked a lot about data and stats, but just actually to hear how you're actually tactically doing that. And there's some wonderful initiatives in there that sound they sound so simple, but they're so powerful. And I think, when you get the full set of data, the thank you piece as well, I think that gratitude piece is really fascinating. I think now the next stage now is we're going to hand back to Mike, who's going to pick up to talk a little bit now about this. Now we've talked about well-being in terms of how we look at productivity and motivation. So Mike, back to you.
Thanks, Jen. I must say, I feel like I'm being set up to be bad cop here a little bit, because everyone's talking about empathy, well-being, all really, really important topics, and we all want employees to have the best possible experience at work that they can. But the reason that I'm going to sort of come back to productivity and motivation is really because, I guess, playing the empathy card, we need to have empathy for our leaders and be able to couch the business case in sort of terminology and context that is going to get their attention and where they can see that it aligns with their own objectives. So apologies for keep doing that, but I think it's really important. Productivity, for me, is one of the key levers that we can use to demonstrate the benefit of additional well-being, more empathy, better line management, a better employee experience. And if we look back at the go back to the results, and I'll just bring the next slide up. This really, this is as a business leader, a slide that you just can't ignore. There is a lot of talk about productivity gaps. There, we all read sort of Gallup surveys and other big surveys that are going on, but they talk about it in very general terms. If you do this, you'll be in the sort of top percentile or whatever. I think being able to demonstrate productivity and ROI at a very individual level is really important for leaders. Otherwise, they can essentially listen to it, but sort of brush it off as not relevant to them. But what this graph is showing us is that, and this is from the employees themselves, virtually everybody believes they can be, well, everybody does believe they can be more productive with the right tools. And obviously, the level to which they think they can be productive, as you would imagine, varies. It varies in terms of the percentages, but it also seems to vary based on the size of the organisation as well. So certainly within larger organisations, people feel they can be, there's an even bigger productivity gap than there is in organisations with under 1,000 employees, for example. But if you take, even at sort of 30%, we've got over 50%, just below 50%, and almost 40% of people saying they could be at least 30% more productive. 50% more productive, 20% overall, 31% for large organisations. As a business leader, a CFO, CEO, there is a massive opportunity. This is really the business case being made here. And if you take that information, what we need to do is validate it for your organisations, which is obviously one of the reasons why we've produced the ROI calculator as well. But I think if we can push that productivity message, we'll at least be able to get the investment and the budget and the time and the attention to be able to do all the things that are going to make that happen, which do include, more empathy, well-being, personalisation, that Sarah mentioned, but it's really important in terms of the employee experience context as well. We want to see people as individuals. They've all got their own individual motivations, challenges, and concerns. And the more we can address that, the stronger that individual's connection with the organisation is going to be. So I apologise, but I should be unapologetic about banging the productivity drum to get the message understood in the boardrooms. And just another stat from the survey, in terms of people believing that the employee experience has an impact on their productivity, again, virtually everybody believes that's the case. In terms of productivity itself, quite a big topic area. So in the book, we actually break it down into sort of three 4 areas really. So the first of those is energy. Sarah's spoken about energy here on feeling energized. That with energy we can do an awful lot. So it's how motivated are we, and not just personally motivated. We all talk about wanting to recruit people who are self-motivated, but also do individual motivations align with the organisation's motivations. You've then got the environment, so that's the sort of working conditions, which again, obviously everybody's gone through a lot of change in terms of the working environment at the moment, but do we have the right systems and tools in place? Do we have the right support that we need to be successful? And then the final piece is really the emotion, the well-being side of things. What was sort of surprised us when we got involved in motivation as a kind of core topic, actually it is possible to be very highly motivated but actually be emotionally unwell. We sort of felt the need to separate that out as a separate topic. And really, obviously, in an ideal scenario, you'd have all 3 of these things working to get optimal performance. But obviously, that's a lot of work. It takes time, it takes investment, and we can't do everything at once. So in the book, we lay out a plan of how you should tackle it. And the thing that we're suggesting is that the place to start is there with energy, with motivation, because not only does it give you something you can impact very quickly, it's very visible, it's very demonstrable. If you look at the difference between a person that's highly motivated and a person that's maybe demotivated, fairly obvious when you see them, when you interact with them, that's the case. So we've got an opportunity. We've got certain tools that we use to do this, but we've got an opportunity to quite quickly improve people's motivation. And it's a bit like a switch. And I don't mean, when I talk about motivation, I don't mean, putting your arm around somebody and saying, come on, we can do better. I mean, really understanding, having the empathy with that individual to understand what is it that motivates you? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? And what is it that you want to achieve in your life? And how can I align your role and what we're doing in the organisation with that? So I think the energy will get you so far. It certainly, not only does it energise you, but it gives you more resilience as well. So it does improve your well-being, and it does improve your ability to overcome some of the challenges that you have in the environment, which is why we think it's a good place to start. And motivation is also key, because it seems from the survey results that this was a quite shocking statistic from my point of view, to say that actually, only 46% of people are coming through their onboarding experience feeling motivated to work for their organisation. So we spent all this time and money recruiting people, and then at the first opportunity to impress them, we've let them down, and they've come out of that process feeling less motivated than when they went into it. So that's really quite worrying from a motivation point of view. So we need to look at what we talk about are kind of moments that matter along the employee life cycle, and onboarding is obviously a key one. First, beyond the recruitment process, to really have a big impact on that person, convince them that they've made the right choice and have joined the right organisation. So that's something that we can certainly take away and put some work into. And Sarah talks a lot about line managers. We also are line managers in the survey as well, and only 50% felt that their line manager actually understood what motivates them to come into work each day. So again, as we were talking earlier, it's not a lot of the sort of line manager interactions and review processes tend to be around tasks and achievements and skills. There's very few conversations going on around the actual the core motivation of that individual. And of course, a manager will have lots of different people in a team who all have different motivators. So we've identified that there are 9 different motivators that drive people in their careers. And certainly, we've been doing we use a tool called Motivational Maps. We've actually done the IOIC as well. And it was interesting when we had a sort of review with Jen on how that had gone. One of the interesting sort of benefits really was actually about having a conversation with the team, which wasn't about to-do lists and skills. It was about who are you, what drives you, how can I understand you better so that I can manage you more effectively. I think more of that needs to happen. But there's a very important reason why we see motivation as key. I've mentioned we use a tool called Motivational Maps, and when we look at, there have been about 80,000 motivational maps done so far. And when we went back and looked at the data, and we wanted to have a metric that we can apply to the calculation. Obviously, we've got the chart I showed earlier, which shows the big productivity opportunity, but we wanted to have something that you could use at an organisation level that kind of made some sense. So we started to plot really different motivation levels, and also then map that onto the productivity. And it's quite interesting because in sort of what we've called here the normal output zone, it was almost a kind of one-to-one relationship between motivation and productivity. But interesting things happened when you move to the extreme. Certainly when someone was very lowly motivated, what tended to happen, their productivity suffered. In fact, some people did try to argue that sometimes that productivity went below zero because they started to affect other people as well. But what also happened when you get people into the very sort of highly motivated zone is that their performance went through the roof as well. So, productivity is not capped at 100%. 100% might be what people from you, but people can always do more than that. People can always bust their targets if they've got the right levels of motivation. I think that's quite interesting. So what we now do for some people that are doing the maps with the ROI is we can actually use their motivation scores, their productivity benefits that they might be able to gain, and make it much more personal for that particular organisation rather than talking in general terms. And the last sort of point I wanted to make really, and the reason why we like to focus on motivation is because it's something that you can affect quite quickly. It's relatively cheap, if I can use that word to address it. It covers a lot of areas. It covers empathy, it covers energy, it covers well-being, it covers personalisation, and just by virtue of the fact that you're stopping and taking the time to understand those individuals better, a difference how they view the organisation, their role within it. So I'm not going to go through and read all these out, but there's quite a lot of benefits that we see from improving somebody's motivation. What I would say though is that there's a lot of talk about culture and culture change, and we also work with organisations on culture, and we talk about creating a winning culture, which is not about somebody winning, somebody losing. It's not a kind of sports type thing. It's really about there's a real opportunity where we can have a win-win-win culture where the employees get the work life that they deserve, organisations get the benefit of the increased productivity, even customers get the benefit of being looked after and serviced by happy employees. It really is, and we've not seen a situation yet where you've been able to implement a high performance for winning culture where you've got a demotivated workforce. So people, when they're demotivated, they're not really looking to be innovative. They're not really looking to engage with change. They're really looking just to kind of keep their heads down and get through the day. So addressing motivation can also be quite a big sort of great environment, if you like, where you can do that cultural work and people will engage with it in a much more positive way. Anyway, that's me finished as far as motivation is concerned. Jen, is there any questions?
Yeah. No, excuse me, please do pop your questions in if you have anything for Sarah, for Mike, or myself. I think there is a real, I think that interesting link between motivation and productivity and how we do that. I just wanted to ask, Sarah, from your point of view, I just wondered if hearing about those links and you know, the work that you're doing, how you think about like motivation and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting kind of hearing the results from the surveys. I think, I mean, it kind of goes to the heart, I suppose, of when we're trying to think about things. It's to do with that motivation, just because of all that evidence around the connection between that and productivity. How we try to sort of approach it in MOJ is we kind of put all our work into kind of 4 pillars of activity, which are all kind of connected to engagement, and then hopefully they will all encourage that motivation. So one of them around kind of vision and leadership. So I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the purpose work we've done where we encourage discussions, but also try to simplify our vision and get our leaders talking about it. Think of kind of creative kind of, I don't know, visuals that we do around that. So we put quite a lot of emphasis into that kind of vision strand to try and make it feel real, you know, for that sort of golden thread, so that wherever you are in the organisation, you can feel a connection to that sort of why we're there. I think the other side on motivation, we do a lot around kind of culture and values, and really trying to make those feel real for people, because I think sometimes you can think, oh, what do these words mean? Well, what does it actually mean to be innovative, or you know, what does humanity mean? So a lot of it is case studies, whether it's through kind of harnessing staff stories, because this is, like I'm sure in so many organisations, so many amazing things that just people do and they go, it's just my job, and then when other staff see those stories, I think it really motivates people. We're doing a big push on collaboration in our organisation. You know, with 70,000 people, it's huge. So you know, not everyone's going to collaborate with everyone, but just to know what's going on across the organisation through those kind of stories, or through leaders kind of explaining some of the joining the gaps, I think that can help with the motivation. And then the third pillar that we focus on a lot around kind of change. No, you said at the beginning it's harder for big organisations just because it can feel like you're dumping on stuff on people. So we haven't cracked it, but we kind of focus a lot on bit where there's a lot of change, trying to work in partners with HR, just so that feels to try and increase where staff feel they have a voice when things are happening around them.
That's brilliant. It's really interesting, and that's what we're trying to do today in this session, is map between what they're saying and it's great to hear your point of view, the work that you're doing, Sarah. Someone's just asked quickly, how many respondents were there? They missed the beginning. It's 2,000 respondents, wasn't it, Mike?
Just under 2,000, yeah.
And the one thing I wanted to ask Mike, and it's coming through as well, from all the data that you looked at, and I know you've only shared a snippet of it, was there one particular data point where you thought, one that really surprised you, and then one that you thought needs to go to the top of the list in terms of action needs to be taken, whether they're the same or whether they're different?
Well, I think, yeah, I did include the one that really I was surprised at was the number of people that are looking to leave an organisation within the next 3 years, and just thinking through the implications of that for all organisations, quite dramatic, and also the level to which people felt they could be more productive was also quite. Normally, you ask people, can they do more? You know, they're normally fairly reluctant to sort of volunteer that they could do more. So we thought people were being quite open there. In terms of the one thing that we will change for next year, based on this role, is we won't give people a fence to sit on in the middle. That was probably, you know, we've got quite big chunks of people just sort of sitting in the not committing either way. So the one thing that we think we'll do differently next year is not have that fence and just force people to really sort of commit one way or the other. Can I say something about motivation as well, just very quickly? The one thing about motivation that we've sort of established is it's almost you can't motivate somebody. What you can do is you can understand what motivates them, and you can use that information to encourage the things that they're motivated by. It's a very personal thing, which is why what we focus on is, first of all, understanding what are the different motivators. Who, for example, is motivated by purpose? Not everybody is motivated by purpose. And we see this a lot in in sort of HR employee experience circles, where people come up with these fantastic sort of schemes and benefits and programs, and then are very disappointed when only a small proportion of the workforce kind of respond to them. And that's because they've kind of hit the motivator for that small group of people. I think until we start thinking about all the motivators and understanding which ones affect different people, then we can start to tailor our programs to make sure we hit everybody.
Great, and then just obviously we're running out of time, but I've just got a couple of quick questions that I think hopefully we'll answer quite quickly. When will the book be available, Mike?
The book's going to come out in April, I believe. It's in sort of second edit at the moment. So yeah, we'll probably sort of do pre-orders from sort of February, I think.
And then the last question, I don't know if this is a quick one to answer. Did you see a key trend and reasons why people leave within the first 3 years? Is that something we could perhaps follow up on, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's probably. I mean, I think there's a lot of areas in the report where you could potentially sort of workshop some of them and actually explore in more detail, and certainly different industries and sizes of organisation as well. But no, we didn't actually uncover what the reason for that was. Although obviously there are lots of reasons in there, like line managers not knowing what motivates them and not having confidence in their leaders, and not managing change well. They're all contributing factors.
I heard a really saying that stayed with me, which is people join organisation and leave managers, and I think it's short, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. And the more we can encourage that culture where managers are supportive, the more we will encourage motivation and productivity and advocacy.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Sarah and Mike, for a fascinating session. We're now out of time, but as we said, we will circulate the recording and make sure everyone that's tuned in has got a copy of the results. And any questions as well, always feel free to get in touch with ROIC directly. And if we don't know the answers, we'll try and point you in the person that might know the answers. So thanks again to Sarah, thanks to Mike for giving us your time today, and I hope everyone's benefited from that. And also thanks to WTV, who are our technical people behind the scenes making these events happen. Thanks, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.